Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about the element nitrogen. Nitrogen is element number 7 on the periodic table. Nitrogen has various uses, has various properties, has various places where it exists and originates from. Our universe consists of a lot of nitrogen. It is pretty abundant in the universe. It forms a very strong triple bond here. It's abundant in our atmosphere, about 78%. Specifically here on this pie chart, we can see how much it is relative to oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other gases, which is mostly argon, 0.96%. Here's a hand dipping themselves into pure liquid nitrogen, and here we can see the light and frost effect, which is in action that prevents them from freezing their hands clean off. Today we're going to begin with nitrogen. I hope you guys are ready for the adventure. Let's begin. Nitrogen has various uses and functions in today's society. Its triple bond keeps it very stable, but when we are able to dislocate its triple bonds, we are able to utilize it for various forms and functions. And sometimes we don't even need to remove its bond. We just need to remove its heat, and we use that to decrease its temperature and in chirotherapy to remove warts from our bodies by freezing them, and then they fall off and we can make an incision and remove them safely by sending them to a state of entropy that allows us to do that. Nitrogen is also used for living and biological things. It's used in fertilizer and soil. It's fixed in the soil. That simply means that it's separated from its bond. Again, nitrogen has a very, very strong bond. It has a triple bond with itself that prevents it from separating with ease, and that makes it a challenge for us here on Earth, both for chemical processes and biological processes that are required because nitrogen is required in the body. It's a big component of ATP, DNA, and various other molecules that are essential for life, and without them we would not be here today. So nitrogen is fixed into the soil. You can have it fixed through lightning because lightning is strong enough to separate the triple bond that exists between the nitrogen-nitrogen bond. Another way to fix it in the soil is through microorganisms which exist within the soil itself. They exist within the soil and they're able to break down nitrogen through processes which allows them to split the nitrogen-nitrogen bond. So they separate and the bonds are fixed within the soil as nitrates and nitrites. We'll talk more into detail about them later on in the video. Another thing that nitrogen is used for in everyday life is for packaging for foods. If you notice, most foods come in bags of air or in packages containing compressed air or packaged air that's sealed, and that sealed air is actually nitrogen because nitrogen is an inert gas that does not allow microorganisms to thrive and live and reproduce, because nitrogen to human beings is an asphyxiant, which doesn't allow us to breathe and grow. It's a similar process to bacteria. When they're placed inside bags such as chip bags, the chips are preserved for longer periods of time than they would be otherwise in the natural atmosphere on the planet, because there's oxygen in the environment, and with oxygen in the environment there's more likelihood that the bacteria will reproduce at quicker rates, and that allows them to decompose the food more quickly and prevents you from enjoying it later on when you prefer to. Here's an image of the packaging machine that utilizes nitrogen to compress and fill up these bags to preserve the food for longer. Since nitrogen gas is so tightly bonded to itself, it's also used as an inert atmosphere, which prevents the conduction of electricity. Electricity is just the jumping of one electron to another atom's electrons. Let's say nitrogen was good at conducting electricity as a double-double bond. Since it's tightly bonded to itself, no electron wants to quote-unquote volunteer and jump onto the next atom of nitrogen within the atmosphere itself. As a result, it doesn't conduct electricity within the atmosphere, and that's what makes it useful for experiments that involve high voltage, that we don't want the high voltage getting in the way of the experiment. Or it's also used for repair because nitrogen prevents the electrical current from harming the person conducting a repair, no pun intended, in the process. The various uses and applications of nitrogen include annealing metals, which is a process that involves softening the metal or shaping it in a way using heat that allows the metal to be manipulated and shaped in a way that is more preferable to the manufacturer or to the person trying to reshape the metal into the way that they prefer. So here are two individuals holding different types of metals. One is an annealed type of metal and one is a hardened type of metal. And here we can see the two individuals. The individual with the annealed annealed metal is able to bend it relatively more than the person with the hardened metal. And the explanation to that is that the annealed metal is softened to the point where it's able to be shaped a little bit more easily without cracking or bending, because metals tend to do that if they are shaped too drastically or are altered in ways that the material wasn't intended to be altered towards. Another purpose for nitrogen is that they're used in the production of diodes and transistors. Diodes, like light emitting diodes. LED is an acronym for light emitting diode, which is a type of diode that emits light when electrical current is applied to it. There's different types of diodes. There's a PNP junction diode or a PN junction diode. All this means is that the materials that coat the diode are coated with different types of elements that are different in charge, and that's what allows the electricity to flow in varying ways. Later on, when I explain the elements boron and phosphorus, we'll go back into the subject of diodes because those are the elements involved in the production and manufacturing of diodes. Transistors work similar to diodes. Actually, transistors are a type of diode that redirect and turn off and on signals very quickly in a computer that allow the computer to process information more quickly than a human being would be able to otherwise. So we create these machines so that they can do things that we can't do at the speeds that we would like to do them. Nitrogen boils at a very, very low temperature compared to metals and most elements that are solid at room temperature. Because of this, when we freeze nitrogen or when we get it into a liquid state, it's so cold relative to the other surrounding materials that it's able to bring them to that level of entropy, and in exchange for the heat that it takes from the surrounding environments, it sends the materials to the level of entropy that it was before, which is a super cold state. And as you can see here, this scientist right here is pouring liquid nitrogen, which is nitrogen at liquid state. It's so cold that it's liquid and it quickly boils off because it has such a low boiling point. So as she pours it, the liquid starts evaporating, and as you can see, the gases right here, the gases are spilling over because it's quickly reverting back into a gaseous state into the atmosphere. So that's what this scientist here is doing. Here is another image of liquid nitrogen, and here is yet another one of somebody pouring liquid nitrogen into a container. Here it is, and it looks just like water, but it's different than water because water at room temperature is a liquid, but this at room temperature under these standard temperatures and pressures is not a liquid, it's a gas. To get it to a liquid, it needs to be cold, and it can never be a liquid at room temperature unless you pressurize it to conditions that would be too extreme to sustain life. So it's impractical to even say or suggest that the liquid nitrogen can be a liquid at room temperature and pressures. In its triple bond, nitrogen remains useful as liquid nitrogen. It's used for reproductive technology to freeze sperm and egg for the future. Nitrogen is also used to freeze foods that we will need for the future as well. Here we show a picture of raspberries and a picture of frozen ice cream. Nitrogen, when it's split apart, is used for living things, such as this amino acid structure, which eventually forms proteins within the body that are used for various functions that keep us alive every single day. If you have fish, it's also important to remember that nitrogen is a big component of your fish's lives, not just for us. Here, when your fish basically poop in the water, they release something known as ammonia, which is consistent of 1 part nitrogen and 3 parts hydrogen. This is toxic to the fish, so maintain it at 0 parts per million according to this diagram. The NO2, anaerobic nitrosomonas bacteria convert ammonia to nitrite through oxidation. Maintain this at 0 parts per million. So what is nitrite? Here is nitrate and here is nitrite. The difference between the two are visually seen, and I will explain them. The difference between nitrate and nitrite is that nitrate is NO3 plus and nitrate is NO2 negative. So that's the difference essentially. Nitrate has 3 oxygens and is positive, and nitrite has 2 oxygens and is negative. And in total, these both have nitrogen. Nitrogen is essential, but when it's unstable like this, the reason it's unstable is because it's not bounded to itself in its triple bond that it previously likes to be in. So nitrate is unstable and nitrite is unstable, but one is more unstable than the other. And we will see here that as the nitrite which is this element, NO2 negative, which is the negative one. The anaerobic nitrosonomalous bacteria convert ammonia to nitrite through oxidation, so maintain this at 0 parts per million. And then the anaerobic nitrobacter bacteria convert nitrite to nitrate through oxidation. Maintain this at less than 50 parts per million. So what happens? The nitrite converts to nitrate thanks to the nitrobacter. It goes from being nitrogen combined with 2 oxygen atoms and it having a net negative charge to becoming a nitrate atom with 3 oxygen atoms and having a net positive charge. So the nitrogen becomes a positive atom and it is to remain less than 50 parts per million within the water. So still at a low concentration. But here's the thing. That nitrite is used by the plants to reduce the algae and produce oxygen for the fish to help balance the pH. That reverts the water state back into a condition that is more conducive to your fish's life within the fish tank itself. As long as you have those aerobic bacteria, you are good to go. By the way, aerobic means that they need oxygen, so they need the oxygen from the water. So keep your water oxygenated, keep your water with plants, and keep them with microorganisms that convert the ammonia into nitrite and the nitrite into nitrate. That way the nitrate could be used by the plants and your fish remain alive for longer. Another use for nitrogen is in the DNA. Here are the 4 bases that involve nitrogen, 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 nitrogen. Nitrogen is everywhere in the DNA. Nitrogen is an atom found in the famous molecule known as TNT, which stands for tinitrotoluene. Tinitrotoluene is used in a lot of explosive scenarios and situations because it is a construct of various atoms which consist of oxygen, as seen here in this image, nitrogen, and carbon. All of these elements combine together to create a lot of various gases and a lot of various compounds. As a result, creating nitrogen gas, creating oxygen gas, creating carbon dioxide, and creating various other oxides in the air, releasing all this energy very quickly. As a result, we get what we see here in this image due to tinitrotoluene. Tinitrotoluene is used in various situations. It is very explosive and very dangerous. Do not play with it because it will hurt you and it will hurt others. Do not use it to harm others or to hurt yourself or other people. The reason we're learning about elements in the first place is so that we can better help other people and help ourselves in this world with so much variety and so much chemistry and so much beauty. In the same way that there's so much beauty, we also need to be aware that the beauty can also be made into chaos and destruction. That is why it's essential to learn about how it works to prevent it from becoming chaos and destruction. Another use for the famous element nitrogen is nitroglycerin. When I think of nitroglycerin, I think of The Legend of Zorro because they used nitroglycerin in the movie. They were creating it in the early days for explosions. They were transporting it, and that's how the main villain in the story actually goes out. He goes out with a bang because of the nitroglycerin that they're transporting in the train. That same nitroglycerin is used within the body to prevent chest pain caused by heart disease. That is the benefit of nitroglycerin within our bodies. The reason it does that is because the elements that it consists of is carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. So when these elements go inside our bodies, the nitrogen actually expands and combines with the oxygen. It releases a lot of energy and causes our blood vessels to expand and dilate, which allows them to flow blood better and all the nutrients within it to get to the places that it needs to within our body and allow us to be healthier and feel better as a result. Nitroglycerin, nitrogen is an important component of it. It keeps people's heart and overall circulatory system well balanced and in check. Nitrogen is used for everyday things such as superglue called cyanoacrylate. Its formula is C5H5NO2, and it's also used for various other things such as creating gunpowder. It's in the whole formula for gunpowder. Nitrogen is also used in the Haber process to produce ammonia to fix it into soil. It's used to produce nitrous oxide, which is a molecule that dissolves within the fat of the brain, and it allows doctors to provide anesthetic properties to the patient that keep the patient from feeling any horrific pain that they would otherwise feel if there was no anesthetics applied. Nitrogen is very important for saving lives. For example, in airbags they put the element sodium azide, which is a molecular compound of 1 part sodium and 3 parts nitrogen. That molecular compound breaks down super quickly into sodium and nitrogen gas, as you can see here. So this here is the sodium azide, and it breaks down quickly into sodium metal and into nitrogen gas. As you can see here, this is the balanced equation for it, and it saves many lives. Before the car had the airbag, many people perished because they didn't have any cushion to increase the rate of time at which they come to a complete stop, which decreases the probability that they would suffer a fatal injury. In 1772, Daniel Rutherford was given the credit for discovering and isolating the new element at that time, nitrogen. Nitrogen is the first and the last of its kind because it's the first of its nitrogen family group, but it's the last one to be discovered because the air wasn't investigated until the 18th century. People didn't pay attention to the chemistry of the air until the 18th century. So it wasn't until then that nitrogen was finally discovered and categorized as an individual element, thanks to the help and contribution of Daniel Rutherford and all the people before him that were not given the credit. To remove nitrogen from the air and isolate it and freeze it eventually, you need to get rid of the contaminants within the nitrogen gas itself, which is oxygen and carbon dioxide. They're contaminants relative to the molecular isolation that people are trying to achieve. They're not contaminants to us as biological creatures because we need oxygen and carbon dioxide to survive. Not so much nitrogen, but nitrogen is a great filler air that consists of the atmosphere itself that allows us to stay pressurized at the levels that are needed to stay alive and conduct biological functions for everyday living. To isolate the element nitrogen, people before used to burn off all the oxygen in the air and then remove the carbon dioxide by filtering it or using some sort of other complex process to eventually achieve pure nitrogen gas in the containers that they placed them in. You can separate the nitrogen gas through fractional distillation, which involves separating the air. You take the air in, you pressurize it, you make it hot, and then you cool it down, which changes its state with freezing cold water. The air gets compressed, it's cold, it gets separated, the carbon dioxide comes out as dry ice because it's so cold that it freezes at different temperatures, so it gets separated from the other surrounding air. The air becomes liquid, it goes through an expansion jet, it expands. The fractional distillation column allows the nitrogen and argon air out, and then the liquid oxygen is kept here, and the nitrogen is separated from the liquid oxygen. Eventually the nitrogen is separated from the oxygen, the argon, and the various other components that the air is made of. The alternative route for isolating nitrogen involves taking elements or molecular compounds that already have the element nitrogen within them and trying to isolate the nitrogen back into nitrogen gas. For example, chili, saltpeter, and saltpeter are molecules that consist of sodium, nitrogen, and oxygen. This is potassium nitrate, saltpeter, and sodium nitrate. Sodium is the Na and potassium is the K, so saltpeter and chili saltpeter. Through chemical reactions, the gases are released, the oxygen is released, and the nitrogen is released, and we're able to, if we have a container, contain the gas and isolate it for our own uses or experiments or just analysis or whatever we as scientists wish to use the nitrogen gas for. Nitrogen gas exists on planets other than our own, such as Mars, Venus, and our famous blue marble. Second group is Venus, Earth, and Mars. They all have large amounts of nitrogen in their atmosphere, and Venus and Mars' major atmospheric element is carbon dioxide. Just like our planet, apart from nitrogen, they also have a lot of carbon dioxide, which contributes to the conditions that exist within the planets, which we will eventually and hopefully travel to one day. So again, just a quick review. Nitrogen can be separated in various ways and processes. People before then used fractional distillation to separate the nitrogen from the air, or they used molecules that already contained the element nitrogen within it to separate the nitrogen and get it as its individual molecule in its triple bonded state. So that concludes our video with nitrogen explained in 20 minutes or less. The previous video was on hydrogen explained in under 22 minutes. If you want to view that video, the link is in the description below. I will continue the series. The next video will be on carbon. Thank you guys for watching.